long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Ahsoka Episode 6, Far, Far Away. So this episode not only has a bunch of Easter eggs and a few meta Star Wars references I'll talk about later, but I also think that it laid the groundwork for the series' endgame, which will involve Anakin, Luke, Yoda, Palpatine, and many more classic characters coming together to set up the next big movie. So I'm going to talk about all of that later on, but first, guys, we have finally got Grand Admiral Thrawn. I am so excited to see him literally in the flesh, and I am very excited to finally reveal something to you. This is our new Grand Admiral polo shirt, which is available at our merch store at ScreenCrushMerch.com. Me and the team designed these shirts ourselves, where this month we also have the high ground, the Say No to Death sticks, Go Home and Rethink Your Life, and this beautiful poster or tapestry that traces the lineage of masters and apprentices. We deeply appreciate all of you watching and helping us out and supporting this store. But enough of that, let's get to the breakdown. So we begin with Huyang and Ahsoka passing the time, and he says,
I remember them from the stories you would tell us when we were younglings back at the temple.
And you know, we have heard this kind of thing before. So in the High Republic novels and comics, there's this ancient nursery rhyme about a creature that turns Jedi into dust, which turned out to be a real creature that terrorized the Jedi in those stories. He says,
History of the Galaxy Parts 1, 2, and 3.
One being the best, of course.
And like, given that Ahsoka creator Dave Filoni is such a Star Wars nerd, I think this has to be a meta reference to the 3 Star Wars trilogies. And of course, the classic OT is the best, like Huyang says. And when he tells his story, he says,
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Now, this is very lovely for a few reasons. One, this story does literally take place in a galaxy that is far, far away. But this is, of course, also how most Star Wars movies begin. Now, back in 1977, this really resonated with people and connected Star Wars to escapism. Like, your life on Earth may suck. There was a gas crisis, a hostage crisis, a stagflation crisis, etc. But this story, this Star War, was taking place in a galaxy far, far away. The early trailers even kind of echoed this marketing technique.
Somewhere in space, this may all be happening right now.
I mean, this iconic 10-word opening also evoked the fairy tales of our childhoods.
In a faraway land, long ago, lived a king and his fair queen.
And actually, this reference ties into a deeper meaning in the episode that I'm going to talk about a bit later. And so, with that line, the focus shifts to the faraway galaxy and to Sabine's journey. The Real Barry on Twitter pointed out that the design of Peridia seems to follow a lot of tropes from Lord of the Rings. The Nightsister castle looks like Minas Tirith. The statues echo the kings of old, and Balin and Shin ride out of a castle like the Ringwraiths. Add into that last episode Ahsoka died and was reborn as Ahsoka the White, kind of like Gandalf was.
It's Brittany, bitch.
And that makes all of this seem very intentional. Maybe this is because this era of Star Wars and the Third Age of Middle-earth are also in very similar situations. Each features a civilization trying to rebuild, but a mysterious dark force from a faraway land threatens the peaceful kingdom.
Person, I gotta ask, where did you get those fetching new models on the countertop?
Well, buddy, I'm glad you asked. These are not models, these are 4D builds. The new 3D puzzle model kit from Spin Master, and I am thrilled to have them as a sponsor of this video. I love these puzzles. Look, they are incredibly light and sturdy, and they look fantastic on a shelf. And unlike other 3D puzzles I've tried to assemble, they're very fun to put together. Like, look at the Millennium Falcon here. They're made from these cardstock puzzle sheets, and every model comes with instructions, so you can concentrate on building instead of getting frustrated looking for missing pieces. The instructions are so easy to follow, with letters, bumpers, and colored dots to make sure they connect in all the right places.
So how long does it take? Like 6 or 7 days? Couple weeks?
Not at all. Smaller models like this Darth Vader take 2 to 3 hours to build, and bigger builds like the Star Destroyer or the Death Star take just 6 to 7 hours. I put on a copy of New Hope and then just binged the trilogy while I put it together. But really, I love the sturdiness and the level of detail on these models. They look great on your shelf, and you can actually pick them up and play with them.
Oh, okay, so what is that, like a few $100?
This one's $60.
No way!
They are incredibly affordable and one of my favorite products we've ever had on the channel. They also have Marvel, Harry Potter, and many more. Now, these are available at Amazon and Target, and links are in the description. Check them out, you won't regret it. Now, back to Ahsoka, where Sabine's prison cell window is an inverted triangle, which I thought was pretty interesting design because the symbol of the Sith is often shown as a triangle, the Sith holocron, triangle, etc. The idea being that the Sith are ruled by a single point, a single master at the top of the pyramid, while the Jedi typically sit in a circle that is more like King Arthur's round table, where everybody had an equal voice. But the Nightsisters, like the Sith, use the dark side of the Force, but their magic stems from a deeper place. You know, when you think witches, you think pagans, you think people who draw their power from the earth, and we see this with their architecture. It all seems to come up from the ground. Even in the Clone Wars and in the game Jedi Fallen Order, the Nightsister temples always seem to be carved into the rock of planet Dathomir. So this inverted pyramid shows that they are similar to the Sith, but they are also unlike the Sith. They're not seeking power to rule and conquer. But also with the Nightsisters, we see the occurrence of threes. In this episode, it is the 3 Force Witches. And on this channel before, we have talked about how in mythology, the recurrence of 3 witches represents the 3 stages of womanhood: the mother, the maiden, and the crone. We also see this in the Scottish play and even in movies like Hocus Pocus.
For not of woman born shall harm Macbeth.
And of course, this is all drawn from Greek myth, where we have the Fates who predicted the future. And we see that in this episode that we'll talk about later. These witches basically sensing the threads of the Force and seeing the future before them. So anyways, the recurrence of the mother, the maiden, and the crone in witches also stems from the natural cycle of the moon, which also explains why the Nightsister architecture always frames celestial bodies, similar to ancient Druid temples like Stonehenge or Native American monuments like Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio. South Manigan on Twitter pointed out that Morgan's golden shuttle seems like the design was inspired by the ornithopter from David Lynch's Dune. And you know what? I can see it. Good one. Then Balin confirms a whole bunch of our fan theories, that the Nightsisters originally came from Peridia, and that they traveled to the Star Wars galaxy using star whale migration paths.
That make you feel good about yourself that you got all your theories right?
I mean, not really, because we've thrown out a lot of theories, like that Merrick might be Ezra, or that Darth Maul might return, which he still might. We have a theory about that we're going to talk about later. Like, you know, because theories are fun.
Yeah, and we like to have a good time. I mean, you know, there's enough people out there tearing each other down, stealing from each other. Let's just have fun with our Space Wizard show.
You're right, buddy. High five. But I will say that the Nightsisters using star whales to travel also connects back to what I said earlier about how Force-sensitive people can navigate through hyperspace. We see this in the Thrawn novels and in the game Jedi Survivor.
Now.
But in Jedi Survivor, a Force witch named Merrin is often using the Force to teleport. And we never knew why until we saw this from the player's point of view. She is essentially creating hyperspace tunnels to appear as if she is teleporting. So the Force witches having this connection to hyperspace travel is an idea that keeps popping up in Star Wars. South Manigan on Twitter reminded us that both the Nightsisters and the Bandits seem to be based off unused Sith concepts for Episode 1 done by Ian McCaig.
Yeah, you keep talking about the witches of Dathomir. Who even is that?
Okay, so let me explain the Witches of Dathomir, like, very briefly. The Force Witches of Dathomir first appeared in the now Legends novel, The Courtship of Princess Leia. It's a hell of a read. They were later brought back into continuity for the Clone Wars TV show. They used a different kind of dark side magic with a K, to do things like resurrect the spirits of the dead, to restore Darth Maul's mind, and even use the Force to augment the body of Maul's brother. His name was Savage Opress. Now, the Nightsisters always had an uneasy truce with Palpatine, but he ended up ordering Dooku to
Wipe them out. All of them.
So the Nightsisters are a matriarchal society who settled Dathomir in the main galaxy. They were ruled by a woman named Mother Talzin, who happened to be Darth Maul's literal mother. And she and the other Nightsisters looked and dressed like the sisters we see in this series. We even hear that the original Nightsisters rode the space whales, like they're the Freemen riding sandworms in Dune. I thought it was interesting, though, that instead of the star whales coming here to breed, they come here to die. Kind of like the elephant graveyard in The Lion King. Now, it's fitting that this planet is not a place that's creating new life. It's a planet that's filled with death, because this planet has also seen the death of the Dathomiri power. In fact, Reverend Dr. Tar on Twitter pointed out, just like on the star map, the planet was shown surrounded by a ring of Purgle. So they bind Sabine with these floating orbs, similar to the Bardaton spheres or the crystal balls the sisters used on Dathomir in the Clone Wars series. And it's also very similar to the technology of the orb map that Morgan used to find this planet. Now, I thought it was very interesting that the Dathomir recognized Sabine right away.
It reeks of Jedi.
Wait, how do they even know what a Jedi is?
Well, Doug, remember, Jedi did travel to this planet thousands of years ago. That's where the Jedi folktales of Peridia originally came from. A lot of this episode deals with how stories and past become folklore, and then they shape the perception of our modern world. Balin said that Peridia was once just a bedtime story, and now he's a little weirded out about how these bedtime stories are suddenly real.
This is a land of dreams and madness. children's stories come to life.
Which is kind of setting up Harriet as this sort of fairy tale world. Remember that for later. So Shin counters this with,
Sometimes stories are just stories.
and Balin's response is basically telling her that stories are never just stories. They are our history, reforged with time. He goes on to tell her how he was at the Jedi Temple during the Purge and he saw his entire story burn.
I watched everything I knew burn.
But then he talks about how these stories and folktales actually become warnings.
Look at history. You realize it's all inevitable.
He then says of the fall of the Jedi and the rise of the Empire,
It repeats again and again and again.
and of course, he's right. We have seen 2 Jedi Orders fall and a new Empire, the First Order, rise and take the Empire's place. It also seems like he's echoing what George Lucas said about the prequel trilogy, copying the tropes of the original trilogy.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Now, when Shin asks if Thrawn will bring them into power, he says he seeks the beginning.
So I may finally bring this cycle to an end.
Yeah, what is he talking about?
Well, I think he's talking about the big event of this season that will bring together all of these characters from the past, present, and future, which we're going to talk about a little later in the video. So in her cell, Sabine tries to use the Force, and instead, baby, Grand Admiral Thrawn shows up.
All right, so who is Grand Admiral?
Okay, look, just a very quick refresher. Thrawn is the most brilliant tactical mind to ever serve in the Empire. He could look at a culture's artwork and immediately learn how to break down their defenses.
To defeat an enemy, you must know them. Not simply their battle tactics, but their history, philosophy, art.
Now, he is a Chiss from the unknown regions of the galaxy. After he was exiled by his own people, he joined the Empire in hopes of forming an alliance to protect his people from other threats. He was one of the main antagonists in the show Star Wars Rebels, but he was eventually defeated by Ezra right before the events of A New Hope, when Ezra used the Star Whales to zip them out there to a new galaxy. Now, in that show, he was voiced by Lars Mikkelsen, who plays him in live action. Lars is also the brother of Mads Mikkelsen, who played Galen Erso in Rogue One. First, we see Thrawn's ship, the Chimera, sporting the same damage the Purrgil inflicted on it in the Rebels finale. Even still sports the Chimera symbol that it had on its underside in Rebels. Higgy Baby on Twitter pointed out that the soldiers and the ship have the aesthetics of the Japanese practice of kintsugi, the repair of broken pottery by fusing the pieces with gold. Mike Griffin on Twitter pointed out that Thrawn's troops gave a lost Roman legion vibe, so I had to look that up, and he is right. There was a legion of the Roman army that existed for over 100 years, but then they disappeared in Britain in 120 AD, and nobody actually knows what happened to it, but it's been speculated that they were defeated by the Celtics and the Scots. Adding to this, that the golden mask of Enoch also looks like a Roman cavalry unit mask, as pointed out by Zach DeLay on Twitter. Tweeting Zhao on Twitter even pointed out that these carved circles that evoke star maps are actually inspired by the Bronze Age Atlantic rock art that are found all throughout Europe, including in Scotland. And VR Dev Brad on Twitter pointed out that among the TIE fighters in this hangar, we also see some LAAT patrol gunships. Great catch. We see that the years of exile have made Thrawn a bit of a cult figure to his troops as they chant his name. Now, I should note that even in the Thrawn origin novels, his troops always become fiercely loyal to him because he goes out of his way to prevent loss of life.
So what if he's the devil, Rick? At least the devil has a job. At least he's active in the community.
The captain of his guard is named Enoch, and this dude is loaded with symbolism. First, his name. Enoch is a figure from the book of Genesis. He's the father of Methuselah. And scripture states that Enoch walked the earth and then was no more, for God took him. Many people think this means that Enoch entered heaven without dying. So he is seen as a figure that defies death.
You get killed, walk it off.
This might be why this guy is also wearing a golden funeral mask, found in the crypts of the city of Mycenae in Greece. Now, these masks depicted people who had died as a way of continuing their identity throughout death. So, apply that to this show, where the Empire has died. These soldiers have lost their homes, they have lost their identities, and yet Enoch and the others persist with their imperial identity in this land of fairy tales and dreams. It's almost like they are keeping the Empire alive in the afterlife. And actually, this whole story kind of gives me Peter Pan vibes. I mean, he's the captain of a ship that's far away from home, and they hunt down the one boy who opposes them, Peter Pan, or in this case, Ezra Bridger.
Yeah, but what's up with Thrawn's pants?
Well, QYT on Twitter points out that Thrawn's pants mimic the German soldiers from World War II, because the original Star Wars adopted Nazi uniforms for the Empire. In fact, you can actually see some wear and tear in Thrawn's normally pristine uniform. It's very out of character for the Grand Admiral, and it shows how exile has really taken its toll. So the Force Witches say that Sabine is a loose thread, and I think this is all going to end up being a nod to the Heir to the Empire novels. So because spoilers for a 30-year-old book are ahead. In those novels, Thrawn has a loyal bodyguard named Rook, and Rook's people are secretly visited by Leia, who's on a diplomatic mission. And Leia ends up secretly winning their loyalty because she is Darth Vader's daughter. So Thrawn nearly defeats the New Republic, but is betrayed by Rook because of the loose thread that he couldn't foresee, Leia.
You didn't see that coming?
In the same way, Sabine is this story's loose thread. She shouldn't be here, yet she is. I think her connection to Ezra is going to be crucial in the endgame for this show, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. I also thought that it was interesting that Thrawn knew of Balin's record from the Clone Wars.
Then you must be General Baylan Skull.
Which just throws that when Thrawn joined the Empire, he studied the tactical history of the Republic and the exploits of these Clone Wars heroes. Thrawn believes that Sabine can lead them to Ezra, so he lets her go. But this is also very in keeping with how he acts in the books, which always portray Thrawn as a man of honor who always keeps his word. He remarks on how the whole galaxy is reliant on her personal connection to Ezra, much as the original trilogy relied on Luke's personal connection to his father, and how Luke ended up reminding Anakin of his late wife.
But doesn't all that undermine the story of the original trilogy? I mean, if we're doing this story, shouldn't we be doing it with the original trilogy characters?
Anyways, Sabine rides a wolf because, you know, Dave Filoni loves a wolf. Notice how some of the stormtroopers have wrapped themselves in these like red cloths, very similar to the garments the Nightsisters wear. Now, we can throw out a lot of fan theories on this. That maybe these stormtroopers are dead and this is being used to bind them and reanimate them. Or it could simply be a way of showing how the Nightsisters culture has influenced the stormtroopers over the years, showing how these years in exile have subtly changed the way troopers dress and carry themselves. It also makes them like even more of a weird space witch Thrawn cult, which I find terrifying and awesome. Kevin Kiner's score also shines in this episode, as he reprises the Thrawn theme from Rebels.
She is on a fool's errand.
Indeed. You may follow her. And when we find our spy, and we will find them, we shall turn them from an obstacle to an asset.
A theme that always seemed inspired by the work of Philip Glass.
You're about to get watched.
Sabine tracks Ezra with the same lifeform scanner that Han used to track Luke in The Empire Strikes Back when she is attacked by bandits. Now they are wearing armor that looks modeled after the ancient Japanese samurai armor. Those helmets were the inspiration for the helmets worn by the rebel soldiers in A New Hope, and of course they inspired Darth Vader's iconic mask and helmet. Samurai and Japanese culture, especially the films of Kurosawa, have always run deep in the DNA of Star Wars. George Lucas directly copied the plot of Hidden Fortress in A New Hope, and Dave Filoni has imagined Ahsoka Tano as a kind of Star Wars Ronin, even carrying two sabers like ancient samurai warriors. The bandits also use ancient weapons like pikes and hatchets, and I love this moment where Sabine deflects a blaster bolt right into this guy's face.
That's gotta hurt.
Morgan and Thrawn are checking out a map that looks a lot like the galactic map from The Force Awakens. Very cool how the universe makes this tech look uniform. The Thrawn map even has a hyperspace route drawn through it, which looks like it cuts through the unknown regions. It's where Thrawn is from. It could be that the Dave Filoni movie will show him recruiting his people, the Chiss, to join the Empire and overthrow the New Republic. And the planet where Luke was self-exiled, Act 2, was actually near the unknown regions, which explains why we see a similar hyperspace route on that map in Force Awakens. Meanwhile, Sabine has made friends with her pig wolf, which is called a howler. Not to be confused with this kind of howler.
How dare you steal that car! I am absolutely disgusted!
I gotta stop here and compliment the effects on this guy and on the naughty turtle people. One thing I love about Star Wars is how it takes elements of Earth culture and implements them into alien culture to make the aliens feel both familiar and new. In the case of the turtle people, Filoni seems to have drawn inspiration from trailer parks. My people.
Wait, really?
Yeah, dude, like even how they essentially built the giant shells for themselves to live in. And apparently the turtle people move them around often, just like people who live in caravans.
It's not English.
How are you? Well, what is my kindness for the horses, you know?
It's just pikey.
They even have aerial antennas on their trailers, like they get TV reception sometimes, like you get a UHF signal on a rainy day. So this is all very reminiscent of Leia meeting Wicket in Return of the Jedi, and then Wicket leading her to the Ewok village. And she also thinks the Howler was just looking for water, which is very similar to Chewbacca thinking with his stomach and getting the rebels caught in a trap.
Great. Always thinking with your stomach.
Chewie's caught in a trap. The Ewoks have caught him, cause he just wanted a taste of snack.
Jason Palmyra pointed out that Baylan rides a dark wolf and Shin rides a light one, much like their armor, but this also echoes their namesakes from Norse mythology. Baylan and Shin are both named after wolves that chase the sun and the moon across the sky, until Ragnarok, the end of days. I have a feeling that's definitely going to come into play at the end of this series. So notice these runes over the temple gate. Now we have seen these runes several times before. They've appeared in Star Wars video games, and they're in the end credits of Ahsoka. Now in the end credits of Ahsoka, several brilliant Reddit editors and other channels like Star Wars Explained went through and translated these runes. And so here we tried to do the same thing. And we found out these mostly just spell random letters until you get to the very end when they very clearly spell out your mom. So as Baylan and Shin are tracking Sabine, he says about Ezra,
comes from a breed of Boken Jedi trained in the wild.
Now, a boken is a wooden Japanese training sword. In fact, Kanan made Sabine use one of these when he was training her, and Hera pointed out that Ezra never had to use one.
Were you careful with Ezra? I don't remember him fighting with a stick.
Well...
So, in this case, I think this is Baylan's way of dismissing Ezra as not a real Jedi. He was not trained properly in the temple. He's wild, inexperienced, and poorly trained.
Well, he's not wrong.
True, Ezra sucks. Now, Baylan says that he misses the idea of the Jedi, but they were ultimately weak, and this is also true. The Jedi were defenders of peace and justice who also tied themselves to the will of a government and ended up taking orders from a Dark Lord of the Sith. But Baylan is also intrigued by this fairy tale land, saying,
something stirs here. Can't you see it?
Yeah, what's he talking about anyways?
Alright, so I'm thinking there's going to be some kind of big old force creature living on this planet. In Star Wars Rebels, Dave Filoni introduced us to the Bendu, a being that kind of sits in the middle between the good and dark sides of the Force.
Jedi and Sith wield the Ashlar and Bogan, the light and the dark.
I'm the one in the middle.
I'm just calling it. There's going to be like a force dragon or like a force giant wolf or something. So then these bandits pop up on a ridge. And this is where I want to call out the other Star Wars trope that this episode seems to pull from. Westerns. In particular, the story of Sabine looking for Ezra is drawn from John Ford's brilliant Western The Searchers, where John Wayne and Jeffrey Hunter spend years looking for a little girl who was kidnapped by Native Americans. Now, A New Hope also drew heavily from The Searchers when Luke sees his family was killed. And in this episode, the sudden appearance of bandits on the ridge and Ezra living in peace among the natives both call the Searchers to mind. Oh, and also I loved how this little baby Naughty has its own hammock.
Yeah, where'd they get that from?
Well, there's the hammock hut on 3rd.
Yes.
Oh, and Swing Low Sweet Chariot, both are in the hammock complex on 3rd.
Oh, you mean the hammock district?
Nice Simpsons catch, high five. And then we get the tearful reunion between Ezra and Sabine.
I knew I could count on you.
Now, he is now played by Amanda Sfondi, and notice how they gave him Ezra's signature blue eyes. Real Megamind on Twitter also pointed out that they replicated the scar on Ezra's cheek that he got in his duel with the Grand Inquisitor. And our old friend Brent Mason on Twitter pointed out that Ezra grew up to look like this hollow image of his father from Rebels. Also, when they reunite, we hear this theme from Rebels. Now, look, it was really nice to see them reunited, but okay, look, he says,
it worked, didn't it? Didn't it?
And then she says, yeah. But she doesn't tell him, oh my God, we defeated the Empire. There was a Death Star, anything like that. Like, wouldn't that have been the first thing Ezra would have wanted to know? But instead, we just kind of gloss over that and all the backstory of the whole series.
Let's not talk about that.
So whatever. Then we end with Thrawn and Morgan talking to the Force Witches. Now earlier in the episode, we see Thrawn's people loading something up. Now this was part of an agreement they had with the Force Witches. Now we never find out exactly what this is, but Morgan does say,
I have seen the catacombs.
So I'm betting that Thrawn is actually loading up dead Nightsisters or dead Stormtroopers. And that somehow in the actual Star Wars galaxy, their Nightsister magic can resurrect these dead troopers or dead witches. Thrawn even alludes to this, talking about how the Nightsisters and the Jedi use death as deceptions.
After all, death and resurrection are common deceptions played out by both Nightsister and Jedi.
But in the case of the Nightsisters, we have seen them come back from the dead. We have seen them reanimate the dead in Rebels, Fallen Order, and with Merrick in this show. This could actually be the Nightsister magic that Thrawn references here.
Great Mothers, I shall once again require the aid of your dark magic.
I can see a Star Wars movie where Thrawn leads a resurgent empire fighting with Nightsisters against the New Republic, with Luke, Ahsoka, and bad Rebels characters like Ezra to stand in their way.
Luke meeting Ezra? Awesome!
Sure, the Nightsisters feel another threat of the Force, that Ahsoka is coming. And this is where Thrawn has to ask Morgan, hey, who the hell is Ahsoka Tano? Because he actually entered the show Rebels right when she left it. And Real Megamind on Twitter pointed out that when Thrawn said,
you would not be the first,
he's actually probably talking about Anakin Skywalker. You see, Thrawn met and fought with Anakin during the Clone Wars. He helped him rescue Padme from the Grisk. And years later, when Thrawn served with Darth Vader, he heavily implied that he had figured out that Anakin had become the Sith Lord. So the episode ends with the sound of ticking, counting down to Thrawn's arrival in the main galaxy. And and this contrasts with the sound over black in the opening, the sound of whales. So we begin the episode with the sound of nature leading the rebels to Thrawn, and we end with the sound of technology counting down to Thrawn returning to his original galaxy. Now, I gotta address what the hell Baylan is talking about when he says,
"What I seek is the beginning, so I may finally bring this cycle to an end."
Now, we have actually talked about this in past videos, but Star Wars Rebels introduced something called the World Between Worlds. As they explain it,
it's a pathway between all time and space. He who controls it controls the universe.
And this is most certainly what Baylan wants. Ahsoka even seems to acknowledge this before their duel.
The only reason I'm here is to secure the future.
Ambitious.
Baylan wants to use the World Between Worlds to essentially rewrite reality, to make a better Jedi Order, and to train others in the same manner he is training Shin.
He was trained as a Jedi. I trained to be something more.
Now, this could also be the same realm where Ahsoka met Anakin and went through her Jedi psychotherapy in the last episode. But the World Between Worlds is also a place where essentially all stories exist at the same time. Ahsoka could access her earliest memories from the Clone Wars. Ezra could see into the past, and we even heard voices from the sequel trilogy.
I believe that.
So, if I'm going to make a guess about what's going to happen here, I think that Dave Filoni is setting up Sabine to be the key because she's the one who finds Ezra. And as we saw in Rebels, Ezra can access the World Between Worlds. I think we're going to see some kind of reckoning within that realm. A reckoning that ends up with a ridiculous amount of cameos. Old Man Luke, Young Yoda, Palpatine, High Republic Jedi, Cal Kestis, you name it. I think this is why this episode keeps talking about the recurrence of stories and myths. We're going to see all of these Star Wars myths recur in this show or in the Dave Filoni movie. And somehow, Ezra is going to be the key here. For instance, he could explain to Baylan that changing the past will actually destroy reality, a lesson that Ahsoka taught him in Rebels.
Kanan gave his life so that you could live. If he's taken out of this moment, you all die.
Or maybe if the space whales are coming to this planet to die, then the World Between Worlds could be the hero's only way home to their original galaxy. And this new galaxy could just be like this, just only this one planet. Like that one level in San Andreas where you get to go back to Liberty City, but just like for one shootout in one building.
Jeez, where did all that come from?
Been playing a lot of games lately. Well guys, that's the Easter eggs in this episode. Did we miss any? Let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.